Hello and welcome to our webinar today. This is on the topic of why WMS and labor management are critical components in the transformation of the customer experience. My name's Craig Moore. I'm a sales VP here at Körber Supply Chain Software, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for our discussion today. So before we start the presentation, we'll just go over a little bit of housekeeping. If you have questions you'd like to submit, please submit them via the question box at any time. Questions are going to be addressed throughout the discussion and especially at the end. And then anything that we don't get to, we'll do our best during the discussion to try to cover your questions at the end of the presentation. I want to introduce our guests for today's program. So Greg Utter is a Senior Managing Director at Alpine Supply Chain Solutions. Hey Greg, good morning.
Good morning.
And Charlie Zossel is a principal at Jackpine Engineering. Charlie, good morning.
Hi, Craig.
Hey, and feel free to correct me on the pronunciation of your last name, Charlie. Sorry about that.
Nailed it. Absolutely nailed it.
Greg and Charlie, thanks so much for joining us today and for joining me in this discussion. Really appreciate it. So we've got the topic of labor management, warehouse management. I think that the outline of it is going to give us that area of how do I become more efficient? And what we know in supply chain execution is that customers want the right product at the right time. They want it delivered with high quality. Of course, they want it to be damage free, and they want it to be at the right cost. And that's not just what the customer wants. That's what you, perhaps as a logistics provider, want that too. Because that means you're running efficiently, you're maximizing your profitability. And additionally, safety is critical. So all these improvements look to increase your flexibility and the morale of the workforce. They're augmented in the right ways to have maximum performance. And that'll be a baseline of our discussion today is, of course, how do we do better? And with that topic in mind, maybe what I'll do is I'll talk just a moment about what we see at Körber Supply Chain Software, who we are as an organization, and the types of solutions that we bring to market. When you look across it, Körber, in its long history as Körber Supply Chain Software, has shown that it's put together a real powerhouse of supply chain execution solutions. Perhaps you saw the recent news where it was finalized just yesterday that we're also expanding outside the four walls of the warehouse with solutions like transportation management. All of this is woven together to provide a solution stack that enables organizations to intake an order through our order management capabilities, to take a look at how they maximize themselves operationally with our warehouse design and simulation capabilities, think digital twin, and then as well within the warehouse with warehouse control, warehouse management, voice solutions, autonomous mobile robotics, solutions around the gamification of the workforce. There are all these other areas where we're looking at that, again, maximizing the performance of what's happening within the warehouse and within logistics. And additionally now with that ability to provide more capabilities on transportation. That's the view that we have at Körber Supply Chain Software. And so taking that to a focus of what we're going to talk about today, we'll go into those discussions about warehouse management and engineered standards-based labor, which we refer to as our labor advantage solution. So it's that integration of labor management and the resources within a facility. And again, we're looking at differentiating ourselves operationally so that we're providing excellent customer service, and we're doing that in a way that we're maximizing the performance of our operations. And when we look at the WMS perspective, we want to be able to release all that work intelligently at the right time to have the right order profiles, the right wave management, and then as things go out, perhaps there's an inevitability that some things might come back. You know, do we have the ability to process returns? And then as we work with our customers over the long term, and especially with our partners, companies like Alpine and Jackpine, the ability to add on software modules that we provide as part of our portfolio to increment the functionality. to provide additional capabilities. And that's a really important place where, we have to look at ourselves operationally. We have to look at the practices that we're performing. If we're getting really dialed in, do we have the opportunity to now look for ways to squeeze a little more juice out of the operation, if you will, from a labor perspective. And then at Körber Supply Chain Software, we're also looking at how we all do this in a scalable fashion, in a flexible fashion, having cloud deployed solutions, and from a labor management perspective, solutions that, again, are going to help our customers to optimize themselves operationally, provide fast direction for a workforce. We ultimately want to get to a place where the more work we have to do, the faster we get done. And why is that? Because we're able to maximize and introduce that efficiency into all of our movements. So it's helping us get the most out of our WMS investment. And of course, we want to be able to do this in a very tightly integrated, almost seamless-like fashion. So all that being said, that's the view we have at Körber Supply Chain Software and bringing all this together. And I'm really grateful that Greg and Charlie are here today to talk about their areas of specialty. And I'm going to roll it over to them now to do that. Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about Alpine Supply Chain Solutions.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it, Craig, very much. So my name is Greg Utter. Again, I'm one of the senior managing directors at Alpine, and I run our systems practice. So when you look at Alpine holistically, what we are is we're a seasoned supply chain group of experts. When I say seasoned, a lot of gray hair, a lot of time in the field. And we look at all these implementations with partners such as Körber and Jackpine, and we bring a unique blend of both technical expertise and industry expertise. We work very closely with our clients and our vendors to make sure that we're presenting and putting together streamlined operations to reduce the costs and maximize efficiency. I mean, that is really what categorically our customers are looking at when they deploy a new WMS like what Körber offers. So we offer that from strategic planning all the way to implementation. So when you buy a new WMS, what's the first thing that you're going to be doing? First off, you need to figure out how the WMS should be configured to run efficiently. There's a lot of operations out there that are coming from no WMS, and some that are coming from a WMS that might be older and they're looking for a technology lift. If you can go to the next slide. So we start our processes working very closely with Körber and developing the design. And the design really is the future state, including process maps, where we're going to put together and configure with the help of the customer and with Körber the best way to configure these solutions. As most of you probably know, this WMS is robust and rich. It's got a lot of features, feature functionality, and configuration. What we're trying to do is adapt the software to fit the needs of the client. And to do that efficiently and effectively, you really have to look at what is important, what are the critical requirements to make sure that it operates efficiently. So we go through a number of steps. I'm only going to hone in on one. The first one is the future state process maps. It's a visual view of how that operations should work and work fundamentally with labor and with other material handling. Craig showed a slide earlier. WCS is in the play. Voice might be in the play. So we help guide that raft down the river to make sure that we're getting the best out of the operation. Next slide, please. Once we're complete with that, it's a very easy to understand and review process. Most of our customers, or a lot of our customers, when we get to this point, we'll blow this chart up and put it on a big board. People can stand up and look at it and watch it. And it really helps adapt that learning curve in a change management fashion to ensure that the way that we're putting this product together, the way that we're configuring it, and ultimately rolling it out will be the best solution for the customer, both current state and what future state holds. Next slide, please. So what's next? After you've got the system configured, right, the next thing you're going to need to do is test it. This is fundamentally one of the areas that we see very commonly where not enough time, energy, and effort is put into place. And it is really critical to make sure that you are covering these bases on a testing side of it to ensure that the thing that you configured is tested well through volume testing, system integration testing, user testing. All the little bumps and bells and whistles get pushed to the envelope to make sure that it's operating efficiently once you decide to deploy it. Next slide, please. So what does it look like? Well, with an Alpine, we've got several different ways to involve the users. We involve them early. We have tools that test the acceleration. We've got a robust library of 1,500 plus test scenarios that are very, very well put together. Now, keep in mind that there will be some deviations from these test scenarios based upon the configuration of your customer and the way that you're going to configure your distribution center. But for the most part, we come into the project with a lot of background and deep domain expertise, so we're not configuring these from scratch. Next slide, please. What's the result of that? So after we started the testing, we're going to watch and see how it works. We've got test scenarios. We've got those that have passed, those that have failed. Anybody that's deployed software understands that when we say a fail, it may not be a fail because of the configuration. It may be a fail because of integration. It could be any number of things that cause these things to go not as planned. So we continue to test these models. We continue to push the envelope to make sure that the day that we do go live, everybody is up and running and the system has been pushed to its max to make sure that it operates efficiently. Next slide, please. The next slide in our playbook is the training playbook. So now we've gone from design, we've designed the system, it's been configured, we've tested the system very thoroughly, now we begin training. So the end user training is very, very critical. And you have to understand when to bring in those training materials, when to start training people based upon the flow of your project. Not too early, not too late, you just have to get it right in the middle. Next slide, please. So what we've developed over the years is our Alpine playbook. And when we talk about playbooks, there are different ways to deploy training. On-site training labs, there are ways to do it remotely. We train tailored to different user roles. You've got forklift operators, you've got order selectors, you've got various roles within the organization. Some overlap and some don't. So we categorically tailor these testing and training scripts to meet the obligation of the fundamentals of your operation. So every one of them are a little bit different, but for the most part, we come to the table with these well prepared. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Charlie. Charlie Zozel, our labor expert. Appreciate it, Charlie.
Hey, Greg, how's it going? Thank you. All right, so why labor productivity? So, you know, when Craig started, he had the whole array of Körber products. Why labor? I think, you know, when we're looking at labor advantage, which is a key component to the warehouse advantage deployment, we can also connect it to other tools as well. But why labor advantage? Why would somebody want to do it? If you look at Bureau of Labor statistics over the last 30 years, there's been less than 1% increase in productivity in supply chain per year over the last 30 years. And you look at what happened during COVID, a lot of volumes went up for a lot of distributors and they had to add more than the people than they needed to handle the volumes. You know, productivity even took a further hit. You look at that 1%, what happens when you have a 1% gain in productivity over 30 years? And the number one thing that happens is there's no more money to pay the employees, which is why if you look at supply chain, people that work in it make less than they did 30 years ago. So that's something we can fix, right? A general labor advantage deployment can save between 15 and 50% of your labor cost. So it is just a radically different way to run productivity with your workforce. And that allows you to turn around and pay your employees more. It leaves a gap in the margin. So we've got room to pay those people, including yourselves. Number two, pertinent to this discussion, is it allows you to charge your customers less so you can go after market share. If your productivity is going the wrong way, if you lived on an island and made hats and now it takes 3 days versus 1 day to make hats, you're gonna have a lot less hats to sell, right? And at a gross macro level, rolling that up, if we can get more done with less, then people can make more, customers can pay less, and then there's more money left in the business to grow the business, to have profits, to have money left with that. Next slide. All right, so when we're looking at labor management, a lot of people just think if I'm in technology, it's a technology project. If I'm in engineering, it's an engineering project. If I'm operations, it's an operations project, and all those things are true, including HR. It really does involve all those key critical components to it. When you build a production rate, you want it to be built on a lean process. Why build a production rate on a broken process? So you want to clean up your processes first. Then you're going to build a dynamic standard to it. I'll talk about how that works and why it's important. with the goal of having visibility management from clock in to clock out. Within Labor Advantage, you can see someone's clock in, how long it takes them to get on that first task. When they're on that task, how well they did compared to the standard time to complete that work. You're tracking utilization just as much as you're tracking performance. So that visibility is critical. You need an HR accountability guideline just like you do for attendance. So we need to grab those bottom 5 and 10% and give them a reason to improve their performance. And then we need to focus on management, making sure that they're using the tool correctly to get results. And then when everything's working right and everything's lined up, then let's turn on direct pay incentives for each individual so they can make more money than they were doing yesterday. So how does the standard work? You know, a lot of places will track cases per hour, lines per hour, who did more. Clearly, worker A did more. But let's look at the rest of what they had in their orders, right? So if I'm just tracking cases per hour, what I've got, all right, worker C hit 40 locations versus 8, but what about worker B who hit 20? Who did more work? You've got aisles traveled. Look at worker C hitting 40 aisles. We'll look at feet traveled. Worker C, 2,000 feet. Now it starts to really shift it over to worker C, right? How could a supervisor out on the floor ever know who did more? Do they even have visibility to locations and aisles traveled or the feet traveled? Probably not. But if you drop down to a standard, it takes all that into consideration and calculates the time that it should take to do that task. So here with the standard being calculated using actual numbers behind the scenes, worker C did 64 minutes of work in an hour. Clearly they're beating the production rate. Worker A, who had those, you know, huge 2-aisle travels with 500 cases, they only did 21 minutes of work. So the standard uses all of that data to calculate the expectation on what it should take to do the work. So just using selection as an example, you've got a start point. The system knows who you are, where you're at, what time it is when you start an order. If you're on a vehicle like an order picker, it's going to know the horizontal time that it takes you to go from point A to point B. It's got acceleration, run rate, decel, stop. And then within the pick itself, it looks at the storage medium that you're pulling from. It looks at the case cube and weight of the item, the unit of measure, the number of reaches that you need to take into the slot, and builds a dynamic pick time. And then it goes travel, pick, travel, pick. If you're doing horizontal, vertical travel, it picks up the vertical travel as well. It can pick up the dolphin movement. If you're on a fork truck, it can pick up the time from where you're at, the trip that you're going to take, the set down of the pallet, the pull down, you know, the grab up and the put. And now we've got some replenishment move or pallet move. It can pick up all of those times. Because of all the scans that are being done out on the floor, this data is free. There's nothing additional that a worker needs to do. The system's going to automatically calculate all these expectations. And then within the Labor Advantage build, we're going to be able to do heel to toe with all the activities. And then if someone's doing a non-productive task, we're going to grab that non-productive task as well, a hotkey into a delay or an indirect code. Most people don't want to see that, but that's the most important thing to see because that's where we get most of the productivity gains is through worker utilization. So it builds a dynamic time on what it takes to do the work. If this is an hour's worth of work, you come back, the standard calculates real time and Labor Advantage real time. With every scan, it's calculating that time that it takes to do it. So you've got pure visibility where everyone's at in the warehouse and how well they're performing. And as we're looking to change habits and processes out on the floor, supervisors got all of this data real time. We can see gaps around break and lunch and lack of performance in the afternoon. We can see work not available at the start of the day. Then after you've got all that calculated standard, it applies a progressive fatigue. So if you're doing the same work at the end of the day, you're getting more time to do it based on those fatigue tables. Next slide. All right, so standard allowable minutes, I think you've got it. When you have the feeds coming over from WA, you're going to catch them in the labor system. You're going to build an XYZ map of the facility. You're going to be able to build custom key volume indicators, KVIs on that standard. And so within the Labor Advantage tool, it's not pre-bucketed like some tools from the past. You actually create the buckets and you can do if-thens and all kinds of connotations, whatever, skip that word, on how you build that standard. So it allows you to build very flexible rates based on the work that's being done. Greg, pass it back over to you.
Hey, thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Greg. It's great to have you with us as subject matter experts. It's a good time now let's dive in a little bit deeper on these topics. And so what I'd like to do is encourage the audience, if you have any questions, put them in. I'm gonna do my best to monitor the question box, thinking about the opportunity to have this conversation also prepared some questions that I know are pretty common that we hear when we're talking about the topics that we've addressed so far today. So maybe the first question I'll pose out to you is, how do discrepancies in inventory management impact customer satisfaction? What strategies can a company implement to ensure accurate stock levels and timely replenishment? So it's, you know, how am I smart about this? Go ahead, Greg. I think you had a thought there.
Yeah, I'll take it first. So if you reflect back to one of my earlier slides in the design phase, you want to design the operation to meet the requirements of your customers. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing it for, is to satisfy the customers. You're going to have service level agreements. You're going to have internal KPIs that you need to hold true with. And if you look at any WMS, particularly if we're talking about WMA, traditionally, if you implement it accurately in the correct way from the get-go, you should be enjoying 99.8+% overall inventory accuracy. And there's two ways to look at that. You can look at accuracy at the pick slot level, which is really what drives your efficiencies. And you can look at the accuracy at the overall look at inventory. So traditionally, your ERP will hold your GL ledger accounting of how many units of product you have. The WMS is responsible for telling you where that's located at the location level, if it's been developed and deployed correctly. So when we look at different options within the WMS to make sure that our accuracy is spot on, we're talking about very regimented cycle count programs where you're cycle counting traditionally your pick locations on some number of cycles. We look at it as ABC classification, count your A's every 30 days, B 60 days, C 90 days. So you set those up during that initial phase that I talked about, which is design, right? So once you've done that and you keep up with that canter, you then look to the next way that you can make sure that your accuracy is there. And that is looking at the real-time solution with the WMS. When you visit a location for whatever process you're doing, whether it's a pick or a put away or a replenishment, you're communicating where you are with a value. It could be the pick location, it could be a scan of the barcode of the items, and all those are set up during design, which is the most efficient way for you to do it. At the end of the day, if you've followed these rules, if you've looked at the training, the work instructions, the SOPs, the way it was designed, following the fundamentals of the things that the WMS provides out of the box will certainly get you to that 99-point+ level of accuracy, which is meeting or exceeding your customer SLAs and giving you the results that you expected to get by deploying a WMS.
Thanks, Greg. Charlie, I did see a question come in that I think might hit with you. The question is, how is earned time calculated?
So earned time is the expected time to complete a task. It's based off of a minimum expectation to do the work. So using miles per hour, it's 2.78 miles per hour, right? So the idea is that it's a pace that you can maintain today, tomorrow, for the rest of your career until until you retire. So it's really not about pace. I think most people on the webinar here would get on a treadmill and they'd set it at at least 3 miles an hour, 3.5 miles an hour. But you got to remember, it's for a 7-hour day, 10, 12-hour day. You're getting some fatigue applied to the end of the day. But the system knows who you are, it knows where you're at, it knows what activity you're working on, it knows your travel path, it knows the type of pick, it knows if you're handling a full pallet or a case or an inner or an each. And you have engineered standard times that are applied to each of those motions. So there's kind of really two tricks. One is being able to see what work is being done, but then also being able to track the discrete time against that work. So you've got the earned time that you've calculated against the time that it should take to do it. I know it sounds like crazy math. It's not. It's multiplication and addition on the actual build itself. You do machine speeds for the machines. We know how fast people walk. That's already built. And then the pick times, we've got 1,500 sites of predetermined data on what it takes to do different motions. So we're just tailoring that into each customer, so we're able to get those rates deployed quickly.
Maybe a follow-up question to that, Charlie. When we put that together, how do we, through your experience, how do you find that you're able to get accountability among the workforce to support the efforts of what you're trying to do? Say, hey, I want to help you maximize your labor effort. I think you made a comment earlier in the presentation talking a little bit about some dynamic standard. I know how efficient you are. I want to help you become more efficient. But how do we do that with positive accountability?
Yeah, so it's not easy. We call that period kind of the knot hole, where you're trying to take the team from where they're at to where they should be. It's much easier if it's an incentive program, which is about 50% of our deployments, because you call the whole program an incentive program, and it's all focused on how do I pay you more, so we're on the same team, let's go and let's drag. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do it? A lot of companies are very conservative. A lot of people are worried about overpaying. It's just too much change too quick. So we go in first with the non-incentive approach when that fits for the customer. So when you don't have incentives, it gets harder. The average customer turns on 35% below the minimum. So the workers are performing at 35% below 2.8 miles an hour, right? So when we roll it out, the first thing we don't do is we do not post performance, because the whole team's going to anchor up at that low performance. We really push the concept of a daily walkthrough, where you take a tablet out on the floor and you can show the worker everything that they did throughout the day. And we don't show them their performance, we just coach on behaviors first. Like, yesterday I noticed that it took you 22 minutes to get to the first assignment. But then becomes a discussion. Well, there wasn't work available. Okay, well, if work's not available, we need you to submit an indirect, through the system that work's not available. And then that lets us see as management that we weren't ready for you when you came in. But then look at your performance around first break. You missed a 7-minute gap. So we're just coaching behaviors first. Then we lean heavily on observations. So you observe the team working against that rate, and you build up your stack of all of the observations that are done. Even in those situations where people are -35 or -50, people can beat the standard the first time you watch them. So it really is more about getting them on task and keeping them on task throughout the day than it is about pace or skill. But if there's pace and skill issues, you're going to see that during the observations as well. And then you can start to coach that. People can only absorb a few things at a time. So we just focus on behaviors first, get them in the flow, get the piece up, and then start working on method, skill, pace, and then coaching in tighter and tighter. And then we usually do have to put in an accountability program of a ramp up to get the team from where they're at to where they need to be. And that could be as long as 3 to 4 months, to get to the desired goal.
So I've got an additional comment. Craig, you mentioned replenishments and the other things that impact SLAs and getting the right product to the right place at the right time. So labor is a great component, but there are some things that will strangle a labor solution. And I'll look back at your map of the fundamental Körber offerings, 2 of them specifically. One is class and the other is slotting. So if you think about an operation, there's only so much space within the 4 walls. Every facility I've ever walked through in my career, probably 500 plus, every one of them are full. And if it's not full, it's soon to be full. So having the tools to look at the facility and the layout of that facility is fundamentally a great practice. How many aisles should be your A aisle picks? How many aisles should be your B aisle picks? Should you put all your A movers at the front of an aisle, a middle of an aisle, an end of an aisle? How should it be slotted? Should they be single deep selects? Should be carton flow? So if you take all those things in consideration and you develop a strategy around how you want your facility to be laid out and slotted, it does nothing but impact labor positively. So if you have it slotted incorrectly, if you have the layout incorrect, even if your labor solution is spot on in calculating your travel, in calculating your grass factor, if you've got 15 people starting a shift and they're all starting in aisle 1 and all your A movers are at the beginning of aisle 1, it's congestion that labor can't account for effectively. So we want to maintain that 2.8 miles per hour. We want to maintain the grass factor. We want to maintain the fatigue and delay that calculates when you're putting incentive-based pay programs in. So it's not just designing the software configuration, it's also making sure that your facilities are laid out appropriately and your products are slotted adequately.
We get asked that question a lot here at Körber as the solution provider about where we're thinking about leveraging the technologies of the future like artificial intelligence. And, Greg, you bring up a good point about slotting. We think that's a great place because slotting is often a series of recommendations when done effectively. And that's a great place to leverage the capabilities of artificial intelligence to say, look, here are your many options. And then that's the great thing about a career in supply chain is when we're responsible for the operation, we can look at those options and using solutions help us make those decisions to introduce those higher levels of efficiency. So it was credited to Mark Twain. I think he said that continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection. That's really the foundation of the conversation we're having today, right? We've got these solutions. Do they fix it all, and does it all stay in a fixed state? No, it doesn't. You have to have that mindset of continuous process improvement, but leveraging your WMS and your labor solution to go back and look and constantly analyze on where can I do better. If you have that adaptability, Greg, as you mentioned, then you've got a real powerhouse and you can continue to improve. Another question I know, what are the key factors that contribute to delays in order fulfillment? How would you identify and mitigate the issues to improve customer satisfaction? So we can jokingly say, hey, look, something like direct to consumer, it's not a fad anymore. E-commerce is here to stay, right? So thinking about that operationally and the volume of orders as they've increased exponentially because they may be dealing in eaches now. So when we look at order fulfillment and potential delays, what are some of your thoughts on maybe how we can mitigate those issues?
Yeah, and that's a great transition. I think I kind of spoke a little bit of it early on is when we think about, like you said, direct to consumer, right? Each pick has been around for a while, but it hasn't been there forever. And it took a while for the WMS providers to understand really what does an each pick mean. So if you as a consumer think about when you order online, traditionally you're talking about single line, single order, right? You order a can of shaving cream, you order one of each, maybe two. So when we're thinking about putting out orders to a group of people who are going to be picking those orders, and for Craig Moore, I'm getting a single item of a single SKU. Charlie's getting another single item of another SKU. Greg is getting a single item of another number SKU. So the worst possible scenario in any distribution environment is travel. Travel is the killer of all productivity. So there's fundamental processes and feature functions available in the WMS. One in particular would be a batch pick. So you take all these orders that were put into the order management system and released to the WMS, and you create a solution via batch pick design where you're sending a single picker out to pick 1, 2, 3, up to 20 orders at one time onto a pick cart, right? That's just one way to make sure that you're getting the flow of goods out there. If you've got pallet in, pallet out, pallet in, case out, it's different because you're picking multiple items onto a pallet or onto some kind of conveyance, whatever that might be. So focusing on reducing the amount of travel and getting more picks per line, whether it's through traditional picking, whether it's through using non-traditional pick to light, pick to belt, other solutions that are out there where it requires maybe a WCS to maintain that integrity between the type of picking and the WMS. So there's a lot of different ways to get to that point. But if you take a step back, what are your options and what are the different ways that we can do it? I know that over the last several years, and I think COVID was part of this, now we're talking about robotics, goods to person, things that we really didn't think hard and long about until COVID hit and people weren't showing up to work, right? I call it the COVID factory. You can call it whatever it was. So when you think about those C-level people who were exposed to a lot of heartache during a period when people wouldn't show up to work, they immediately went out and said, let's start talking robotics. Let's start talking goods to person. Let's start talking AMRs. But what they didn't keep in mind is, does my facility support it? Is the configuration of my facility correct? And do I have a WMS that can support that kind of technology? So we spend at Alpine a lot of time going back into companies, and we call them rescues, for lack of better words, where they spent a lot of money, but they didn't think forward enough on how they wanted to deploy to make sure that they're getting their investment the way that they needed to get an investment.
You know, there's a question that came in that ties in with that, and I'm glad you brought that up, Greg. You know, with the move toward automation and goods to persons picking, the amount of time that gets spent on a pick is starting to decrease, right? Because we're introducing new forms of technology and automation to say, okay, I recognize that you may have a higher volume of each picks. So we've got these new technologies which are enabling, you know, less movement because we're going to do goods to person. So I'm going to bring you the product, you can pick it faster. So now thinking about that, what do you see as some notable values in introducing labor management there and engineered standards in a goods to person operation? You know, Charlie, I'm thinking kind of in the, and maybe I shouldn't call it the old days, but, you know, we would talk about pick towers and, okay, yeah, I can introduce LMS there, but how do we maybe introduce LMS in something like a goods to person operation?
Yeah, so it works great in that environment. A lot of those systems, they don't really want to talk too much about the labor component. It's really heavily, you know, an MHE project, a technology project, but it doesn't remove the person that's still completing the pick. And when they're not getting productivity out of the solutions, the labor management tool can give you full visibility of all those activities. So if you had a Locus robot or a 6RS cobot deployment where you've got people that meet the robots in the racks, we can see every movement and every step that every person takes, and we can take out that delay component of people not actively doing the work. Just because the robot's there doesn't mean that the person is there also working, but we can see that foot-to-foot travel that they make, and then also the discrete pick time that they've got. In a goods to person, like an auto store environment where the goods are a Kiva, Amazon, where it's coming to a person, we can see the dwell time, you know, the time between tote and tote available, and give that worker credit for that dwell time. And then the actual pick where they're doing a put to store or a put to, you know, order, we can see, you know, what they're doing and how much time they've got per each, per line, per tote. And then for the completed totes, the time that it takes to close out a tote or to close out a box and push it off and ship it, and then build a new box and create it, or grab an empty box and put it back in and induct it. So there's still a huge component, right? Like in, you know, that Locus Robotics, if you look at like a regular pick path, you know, generally they're traveling 40% of the time. We're going to get a reduction of the total travel, but how much? With Labor Advantage, you're actually going to see the feet travel, and you're going to see the percent of time that they're spent in walking, and you're also going to see the percent of time where work's not available for them to pick in their zone. So it can help you staff, plan, schedule, and really dial in how many bots you need and what the perfect match of work to bots to worker is as well. And if you're running into issues like work not available or dwell time or waiting, it really helps identify where the time is being lost. So it's not the system's not working, it's this component is not set up right. Let's fix that component. So it basically, those systems don't make it less complicated to run the operation. It makes it more complicated. So we need to lean harder into the math to get the benefit of the systems out. And Labor Advantage can do that.
And I know that a lot of the autonomous mobile robotic solution providers, they have their own operating systems, their own interfaces, and you know, we're doing a lot of work at Körber in working with those, and even introducing visibility components like our unified control system to say, let me give you one place to go take a look at that. Because fundamentally, we are getting to a point where we've got systems like labor management, which were designed for helping the, let's call it the human workforce. But now we're going to incorporate AMRs and other forms of automation into that. And that's where we on the Körber side are developing solutions to say, we'll give you that point of visibility, but the operational standards still apply. And the WMS is still there to provide directed activity to help you make intelligent decisions and to say, with more work, how do I still get it done fast? And whether we're directing the human, the robot, you know, some form of automation, then that's what we're busy at Körber Supply Chain Software working on to say, can we give you that solution stack that can help you control all of that? Yeah, you know, another question that came up was, can opportunistic cycle counting be configured? And I know the answer to that is yes, but Greg, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a yes, but, right? So you could answer that question in many different ways. Opportunistic, does that mean that when you are a picker and you visit a pick location and you've configured it to say, if I'm seeing 3 or less as an inventory balance on hand, should the picker confirm that balance, right? With a simple yes. Or if I get to a location that has 0 when I arrive, should I confirm a 0? Well, the only time that should happen, really, unless you're using non-sticky locations, is if you don't have any more inventory in the building, because if you did, it should be replenished by now. So I like the idea of opportunistic cycle counting, but that impacts labor, because what Charlie will tell you, and I'm going to steal you for a little bit, is when I put a labor standard together, I may have calculated you to go and visit a location and grab 3 units and not take that extra 0.2 seconds that it takes to confirm the yes or the no on the RF device, depending upon how you do it. So I love it and I hate it, because it may impact what a labor standard shows you to do. I've had conversations where the warehouse manager says, pickers are pickers are pickers, let them pick. My inventory control people are going to hit those cycle counts the way they should hit them. So I've got 2 trains of thought, but great question.
Yep. Charlie, did you have a thought there?
Yeah, from a picker perspective, you want to get in a rhythm. You want to get in a flow. You want to be, not in the system, but of the system. Like, you want to be moving through. So if there's things that are intermittent that interject inside of that rhythm, it can blow someone's performance, where we're breaking the train of thought, the planning, the step to the next, the pallet check or the move of the cart. You want them in a rhythm. And that opportunistic cycle count, you're not going to use that as a system of record. You're not going to actually change. If it's empty, you're not going to change the inventory to 0. It's basically just going to flag an inventory control person to go work it and solve it. It can work. I'm not a huge fan of it overall, but it can work. If you've got 27% item not found for your e-commerce, you got to do hospital. You got to do, like Greg's saying, like a rescue. Let's turn it on. But if you're at the 99.9 and we're breaking rhythm to confirm a known quantity, then I would say no. Right, so you can flag it on and off, and you can flag it on and off by user. Like, there's a lot of choices you can make with it. Like, you definitely don't want to be counting big numbers. Like Greg said, or you said, it's you want it to be under 3 if you're doing a count. But
I think operationally, there's a reality to recognizing maybe interleaving a task is okay for a resource that is a known entity to you, and you know that they can handle it. And that's where, again, from a solution perspective, at Körber with WA, we can say that particular individual, they have the ability to do that. And I'm going to allow that to happen. Somebody else, we could say, we're not going to do that. We just, to your point, we're going to keep them in the rhythm of picking. And I don't want anything disruptive there. So role-based capabilities in our solution are present. And for that reason, because sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no.
Yep. Amen.
Sorry, Charlie, I cut you off. You had another thought?
No, yeah, I was just going to say, from a labor advantage perspective, you can give time for that hook, right? So if we're going to force that count, we can even feed off if it's a change count, right? Like, so you can build a time for that cycle count and that extra amount of time to do it. And Greg,
earlier in the conversation, shifting gears a little bit, I made the comment that all of this is important, keeping safety in mind. So we actually had a question on that topic, which is, how do you incorporate safety and accuracy and not just productivity in a pay for performance scenario?
Yeah, with safety, you got to be a little careful, because you can run into OSHA issues if they find out that you're reducing incentive pay because of a reportable. OSHA is going to come after you for that. So it's usually outside of it. We do focus on safety when we're building the process, when we're going through the lean review of it, and when we're building the productivity rate for that work. So we need to make sure that the rate is built off of a safe process. And then when you're doing observations on people, you're looking for those, things that are a safety concern. I've never seen anything that shows that a high performing worker is a less safe worker. You can run into issues where someone's working at, plus 50, plus 60, and they're throwing, 6 cases a pop, where they're going to potentially create some, issue. That's coaching, right? It doesn't get rid of the need for management to coach safety. It doesn't fix any of the issues around safety, but it gives management time to focus on safety. We've also, you're going to also have less workers in the building. So if you've got 10 workers and now we drop the bottom 3, over time through turnover and the other people are doing the process correct, you've got 7 of your most productive people, which are also going to be your safest, longest tenured people as well. And you've got less turnover at the bottom, which is a big safety issue. So we've seen safety improve, but it's through the raising all boats type issue. With quality, you can. And we do recommend quality being factored into the incentive pay. It's its own silo. When someone's perfect over a 4 to 6 week period, it will multiply the productivity incentive by 120%. So they're getting 20% more pay when they're perfect. And then you go down the scale. So if you've got issues and you're at 99.8, your quality is not there, you're decrementing the performance incentive. And we have seen quality go down when you're only incenting on performance. One of our monikers is you get what you incent for. So if we don't incorporate quality, quality will get hit. So it's important to have it in the calculator.
Yep. Any thoughts on accuracy?
I was grouping that in with quality.
Putting that all together and just overall general performance, because I'm kind of thinking that, the handoff from, let's say we're in the pick cycle to, we're bringing it to some sort of a perhaps induction into a staging area or getting ready for a pack station. That level of accuracy to say I don't have to go back on the things that you've done can also be incorporated into those standards to say that, you're not causing rework. Right. So another question, this one maybe is a little more wide open, but which capabilities will become available for workforce planning? So think about that in terms of maybe a forecast or maybe some kind of a labor plan. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think within the WMS, a lot of that's dependent upon how you've integrated to, I'll just call it your host solution or your ERP solution. So there's two trains of thoughts. Are you taking orders in from whatever order cycle that you've got, whether it's B2B, B2C? When are you going to introduce those to the WMS? And how frequently are you going to introduce those to the WMS? Because Labor Advantage does a really nice job of calculating the needed staff if it knows how much it's going to be calculating it against. Now, you can take a forecast and say, last Monday I had this order volume, a year ago Monday I had this volume, a month ago Monday. You can use those as forecast models, but to really get nitty gritty, what it really needs to look at is the actuals, because there's ups and downs in your order cycles. It's, it's geography, it's time of the day, it's time of the week. So if it has all those different components, it does a very nice job of saying, here's the number of people that I need. Now I'll let Charlie explain, when you do know what that manpower requirement is, then what does labor do to take advantage of that?
Yeah, like if you've got an old school, food service, grocery, where you get your whole work order downloaded the night before and it's all there before your shift. Now we can do pre-calculated standards on all of that work, and we could know the exact minute of how long it's going to take to do the work. And if you look at the number of people that are scheduled and show up, you can triangulate it, and can even look at past performance for the exact people that are on task. But that's not the world for most distributors. Like Greg is saying, it's when does Labor Advantage get visibility of that work? It's like Greg's saying, it's great at post calculating the standard and how long it should have taken me to do that work so I can see it, but it can't calculate it until I have visibility to it. So that's just one of, like, if you're in e-commerce and you're picking orders that come in that same hour, yeah, we could do how much work you have remaining, but we don't know what that next bomb is going to look like an hour from now. So it is tricky to use it for workforce planning. You think it would be fantastic for it, but it's just every system struggles with data visibility and what's out there. But it really leverage a true labor standard to calculate needs. It's just tough in most real world situations. So it can do it if the data's there, I guess is a simple answer. But for the most part, the data's not there, so it's hard to do it.
And I think that what I've seen with a lot of our customers, especially those that have done a really effective utilization of our WMS in an environment where it's more direct to consumer or multi-channel, is they're dealing, to your point, with that daily drip of orders that is coming in. They don't have a lot of preview of what there's going to be, right? There's not that level of visibility. And that's where, number one, the process arrangement is so important about how work flows into the warehouse. And then, you know, Greg, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, the waving management. Like, how do you do this? How dynamic are you? Right? Because the reality is you have to be ready to deal with the unknown. And then once you know it, how do you prioritize it? How do you release it? How do you provide that directed activity? And then once it does get released and it's directed, Charlie, it's fallen back on that labor piece to say, how do I do it as efficiently as possible? And I can look at some of our customers. Go ahead, Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, like, because you don't have the visibility for work planning, but you do see how well you did today and how well you're doing today. And when you're negative 35 and you start to move closer to that minimum expectation, and then you move into incentive pay and you're beyond that, every single hour, every single day, you're getting feedback on how well you're staffed to the work that's coming in. So you do start to see how many people you need, when you're understaffed, when you're overstaffed, what situations are you running into, what does Monday look like versus Friday, taking into all the accounts of the differences of Monday and Friday, right? And your workflow and your work volume. So even though it's not a true, this is exactly what you need, your operators get very good because they have immediate feedback on how well they're staffed to the work that's available. So it is, you are labor planning more through the guts of the management team of getting that consistent feedback on it. And you do know when you're misfit and when it doesn't work. It also really takes into account the changing mix of your orders. So, you know, if you're a hardware distributor and you're very seasonal, it will give you your productivity expectation that day based on the work content for that day. So if you're having to walk further to get the same number of picks, it'll pick that up and give you the time to walk further. So when you're talking to the upper management in your organizations, like, yeah, our lines per hour are down, but our team's performance is up. And this is why, because we're traveling this many feet per pick. And you can see it and you can have good discussions. And, you know, full case environments, that second case that you're picking at a slot is 4 seconds. So if you get a lot of second cases and you're not having the travel time and the location time and the queue time and the wrap time and all that, and you're just getting a lot of additional cases, you'll see your cases per hour fly up against the standard. And if it goes the other direction, which most places see it going the other direction, your cases per pick are getting lower and lower and lower over time. It's not our people are performing worse, it's our orders are getting more difficult to fulfill.
Yeah.
And the standard takes all that into account and gives you the ammunition that you need to defend yourself as an operator, right?
Yep. Cool.
Greg, did you have a thought?
Yeah, no, somebody posed a question, and we get this all the time. When is the right time to introduce labor into a project where you're standing up a new WMS? And I'll take my turn at bat first and then hand it to Charlie. So there's kind of two schools of thought. If you're coming from a facility or a new business that's purchased the WMS and they've run labor in the past and they count on labor to make sure that they're getting their pay for performance, making sure that everything is tracking, and grocery is a perfect industry for this example, then you deploy it from day one as part of your project plan. If you're going into a company that's never used labor, they've never turned it on, they kind of know what it is, but they're not really sure, I've seen that deployed as a phase 2. And phase 2 doesn't mean in 2 years. It doesn't mean in 6 months. It means when is the right time to introduce labor. But a fundamental thing that we need to really keep in mind is, even though you may deploy labor as a phase 2, when you're going through that initial design, which was on my first chart, make sure that you're taking into consideration the labor hooks that are going to be needed when you do deploy labor. To take a step back after you've done the configuration through design and then talk about labor hooks, it's more involved. It's not impossible, but it's more involved. So think with the end in mind about when is the right time to deploy it. And Charlie, I know you've got some details on this.
No, I think you nailed it. To quote James Carville from back to old school, that's the perfect answer, right? But just to put some color on it, like, it's, if you're gonna build a house and you might put in a sink later, you put the plumbing in. If you're gonna, you know, put a toilet in your basement, you want to plumb that toilet. Even if you're not going to put it there, you want to put the stump in the ground, because the last thing you want to do is go back later and crack all that concrete and run the piping after. So just like Greg said, if you're going to do labor, even if you're just thinking about it, put the piping in to hook the labor. You're going to do a significant reduction in costs in IT. You're basically doing it twice. So just do it once when you're doing, even if you're not going to turn it on and still pipe it. just from the, the point of doing it. It's 6 lines of code, and it's repetitive code. And if you're in the code already and you're building it, build the hook. It takes no time. And then that way you don't have to open it up and go back into the flows and retest it later and do it, everything again later. So, and again, it's labor advantage when you're talking WA to LA, warehouse advantage to labor advantage. It's not an integration, it's integrated. It's real-time scan, real-time feedback, every single scan. And most of the systems that are out there are batch download 5 to 15 minutes later. This is not that. You've got real-time visibility at each scan level.
I want to thank both of you. I think it's been a great conversation. Appreciate you taking questions from the audience, answering a couple of the other questions that I had put together. And I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're coming up toward the end here. So I didn't see any other last questions come in. So I think let's call it here. And I really appreciate the constructive conversation. And for anybody that's on the call, if you feel like you had a topic that you didn't ask the question on, you want to get a little bit more insight, please reach out to us. I can tell you something about Charlie, Greg, and myself. We don't mind having a conversation. So we're grateful for the chance to be in front of you today. We hope you have a great one, and we look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you very much. Everybody take care.
Everybody.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.